The Turn On Your Inner Light show. It's time to stop just surviving, and it's time to begin to thrive. It's time to live happier and healthier. Turn stress into strength. Noted author Debbie Mandel will show you how to move beyond personal doubts and fears and into positive perception to turn on your inner light. Here's your host, Debbie Mandel.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to my show. Our guest expert is Moises Velasquez-Manoff, a science writer whose work has appeared in the New York Times Magazine, Wall Street Journal, and the Chicago Tribune, and he is the author of An Epidemic of Absence. You will gain new insights into allergies and autoimmune diseases. Perhaps you will decide that we are too clean for our own good. Welcome, Moises.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So, are we too clean for our own good?
Yeah, well, so it depends what you mean by cleanliness. It seems that we are missing contact with certain microbes and maybe a few parasites that actually calibrate our immune systems properly so that they don't overreact. And when I say overreact, I mean things like hay fever, which is basically an overreaction to pollen, or food allergies, which is an overreaction to whatever the food may be, peanut sick. So we're too clean in the sense that we've lost contact with that very specific group of what one scientist calls old friends, because they seem to help us. But we don't need to have contact with pathogens, because they don't help us anyway. And pathogens are things like the flu, or like polio or smallpox, or sort of the old antagonists that have plagued civilization for perhaps millennia in some cases, that we finally vanquished in the beginning in the 19th century and ending in the 20th century. Those aren't going to help us. What we need are the other ones, which we actually have a much older relationship with.
And what are those other ones exactly?
Well, that's a good question. I think science is sort of is figuring that out as we speak. But they include perhaps some parasites like hookworm and whipworm, and maybe other parasites as well. And then there are a whole range of microbes that live in our intestine. I mean, we are, as beings, we actually are outnumbered by bacteria. The ratio is 10 to 1 in terms of cells. So there are 10 times as many bacteria in your body right now as there are human cells. And then in terms of genetics, there are 100 times as many sort of genetic instructions in your genome, in your metagenome, as there are human instructions. So in many ways, we're actually microbial beings. And sort of what you think of as you is really just this flask that holds the soup. Those are turning out to be a little bit more difficult to determine which are important for our well-being, because there's so many and because we're only now looking into it. And part of that story is technological. We really didn't have the ability until relatively recently to see these microbial communities. Now we just do these genetic fingerprint sort of studies on them before we had to culture them. And if you try to culture bacteria that are native to the human gut, it's actually quite difficult. A lot of them are impossible to culture because apparently the conditions of our gut are very specific and difficult to emulate. So it remains to be seen with the microbes, which are important. But there's a lot of interest in parasites because we know which ones they are. And over around the world, it seems that populations that have parasites don't suffer from autoimmune disorders like multiple sclerosis or inflammatory bowel disease, or allergic disorders like hay fever or asthma, as much as populations that have lost the parasites. On the other hand, I should add that they suffer from other problems like malnutrition and failure to thrive and so on. So there is a quid pro quo here.
So what you're really telling me is there's a delicate balance. The problem is, I think, is that in our cleanliness, like using antibiotic cleansers, I mean, that's ridiculous. Antibacterial soaps. For what reason? And that has got to be affecting us, as well as I had read years ago that in apartments that have cockroaches, children don't tend to get asthma.
Well, I'm not aware of that particular study. As far as I know, cockroaches actually correlate positively with asthma. But you're right on with the antibacterial. Especially because some of these soaps and stuff have something called triclosan, which is a sort of unnatural antimicrobial that it takes forever to degrade in the environment, and it's what's called an endocrine disruptor, which means that it acts like a hormone in certain cells of our body, so that it messes up sort of the signaling of growth and maturation in our body. And it's just not. The more and more science that comes out about it, the less and less it seems like we should have that stuff around.
And we feed it to the animals, right? It's in the milk. Cows are fed antibiotics, are they not? We're afraid of salmonella or other things. We still get that anyway, no matter what they feed the chickens. What I did find fascinating also in your book was that we have this microphobia, as you mentioned. It's got to be clean. We're going to get sick. And a sugar-laden diet. And many cancers, I have read, grow from sugar if we have a proclivity to cancer. So is this a deadly mix? You make that case, I believe.
Yeah, it's interesting. The so-called Western diet, which you can imagine as a junk food-y diet, lots of easy calories, high calorie density, lots of sugar, lots of fat, very little plant stuff, a very little complex material that seems to cultivate a certain kind of microbiota. And so you can think of the microbes in your gastrointestinal tract as an ecosystem, right? Mm-hmm. And they'll change in response to whatever is coming their way, because they essentially eat what you eat. So you're feeding them stuff. And that simplified food, the Western diet, cultivate certain microbes at the expense of others. So you can think of it almost as, every year there's a gigantic dead zone that appears in the Gulf of Mexico from all these from the leftover nutrients from farming washing down the Mississippi, the fertilizer. So it causes this bloom of algae that then as it decomposes, sucks all the oxygen from the water, and all the life there dies. All the life there that is multicellular, that needs oxygen, right? Mm-hmm. So the paradox is too many nutrients create sort of a dead zone. Something very similar seems to happen in our gut, where it simplifies the ecosystem in a way that promotes inflammation. And inflammation
I don't want to rush that thought, because inflammation is the trigger to everything evil. And we will return with Moises Velasquez-Manoff, author of An Epidemic of Absence.
Now you can take Debbie Mandel home with you. Her book, Turn On Your Inner Light, Fitness for Body, Mind, and Soul, will help you decompress with healthy, positive, concrete solutions. Common life challenges are presented so that you can quickly find the help you need. Emotional tips, original meditations, and a fun and easy-to-follow fitness workout for each mindset. This revolutionary new method will help you rewire mind and body to take back your power. Get it on Amazon.
Are you overwhelmed with the burden of taking care of children, parents, or both? Are you taking care of everyone else except yourself? It's time to change your habits and re-energize. Debbie Mandel gives you an innovative and easy-to-follow program for good health and happiness. In her magical new book, Changing Habits, The Caregiver's Total Workout, Debbie Mandel shows you step-by-step how to find the optimal balance between giving and receiving, and guides you to exercise and eat right to take care of yourself. What are you waiting for? Read Changing Habits and start training for your life. Life does not need to be a burden. Get Changing Habits, The Caregiver's Total Workout on Amazon.
Listening to the Turn On Your Inner Light show. I'm your host, Debbie Mandel, and I'm speaking with Moises Velasquez-Manoff, author of An Epidemic of Absence. So before commercial break, we were speaking about inflammation. Now, how does this work in the toxic soup?
Well, I'll use a really interesting experiment to illustrate how diet translates into a kind of systemic inflammation. So we, for a long time, sort of suspected that the Western diet is not that good for us. The Western diet being, the junk food diet, essentially. If they feed mice junk food, they quickly develop all the problems associated, that we see in humans. Metabolic syndrome, kind of type 2 diabetes, cancer in the long run. That is, I should say, the predisposition to these conditions increases. But if they feed mice that have no microbes the same diet, the mice are fine. They don't develop any problems. So that sort of suggests that our native microbes are crucial to transforming this diet that we've known is bad for us into actually negative effects. And what seems to actually happen is they promote inflammation, as we were talking about, in the host being you or the mouse or whomever it may be. And chronic low-grade inflammation is just, it seems to be at the root of everything bad, of all the degenerative diseases that they look at these days. It plays a role in some of them, dementia, it seems, in the cancers, of course, especially of the gastrointestinal tract, like
the cardiovascular system.
Exactly, cardiovascular. I mean, there's nothing good about it, essentially. So it's something you want to avoid. And, of course, because some of it is driven by diet, or that is diet microbial interactions, it's actually fairly easy to address. You just change your diet.
And the medical community loves the Mediterranean diet, and I know that you wrote that omega-3s in a pregnant woman's diet could reduce allergy in the offspring, right? I mean, I think that goes hand in hand. If you follow that sunny diet, you will be a sunny person.
Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, the Mediterranean diet is famous for not too much red meat, for a lot of fish, which are rich in omega-3s. I should point out, of course, that fish these days, because of, for other reasons, they're high in possibly in mercury and other things. So you should always watch out for that. But if you eat fish low on the food chain, like sardines and things like that, you shouldn't be exposed to some of these heavy metals. But Mediterranean, lots of beans, lots of legumes, nuts, grains, and, you can make your grains whole grain so that you get more complexity. I mean, that seems to be the issue, right, is that a diet consisting of real food, of plants and tubers and legumes and so on, has a lot of complexity to it. And what they find when you eat that kind of those complex sugars and fibers is that you actually can't digest a lot of them, and your microbes ferment them for you. So you throw in what's called a polysaccharide from a plant. You can't do anything with it. It just goes all the way to your large intestine, or maybe your small. Some microbe there specializes in degrading that exact fiber, does it for you, and then you use the byproducts of the fermentation, right? Mm-hmm. That's one of the reasons we have microbes. So what you want to do, I mean, it seems like the microbes that are best for us are the ones that ferment precisely those complex sugars from plants that we can't ferment ourselves. So you need to think of your ecosystem engineering as keeping those populations happy, which is one reason to eat a Mediterranean-type diet, or a diet full of a lot of plant products that are not too overly processed, or that still retain some of their natural fibers and products.
Apropos to this, the message that I really got from your book, if I understood everything correctly, was that we got to keep our microbes happy and engaged and busy so that the body doesn't attack itself, the self against the self, and we have something to do. Is that really the heart of it here, is that we're too clean and we're eating stuff that we can't pronounce, multisyllabic ingredients, so they're chemicals, and the body doesn't know how to handle it.
Yeah, well, our microbes don't know how to handle it. I mean, the funny thing is that you eat the stuff that you can't pronounce, and it's not that your microbes don't know how to handle it necessarily. It's that some microbes do know how to handle it, but they're not the right ones. So you select for the wrong microbes, right? It's like, it's a form of ecosystem engineering that makes the ecosystem less healthy for us. So, but I mean, it's not that hard to sort of intuit what's good for us in terms of diet, because it's the diet that we've been eating for a long time. I mean, of course, you want to take advantage of some of the things in modernity that we have that we didn't have before, like year-round fruit and vegetables and all that stuff. You know, I mean, people probably consumed a very staple type diet in the past that we don't necessarily have to go back to. That's like eating porridge every day. You know, I mean, please take advantage of the bounty of modernity, but don't, you know, the whole processed food and junk food, sort of the growth of that. I think it's just the cost of it has been huge in terms of our health. Part of the reason this study, this work on the microbiome is so interesting is because it illuminates why. We knew it was always bad for us, but now we know that part of the reason it's bad for us is because it changes our microbiome in a way that's unhealthy.
And, you know, it might be a real good thing that there won't be any more Twinkies. We're mourning the past in that way.
That's right.
So accordingly, you know, I also read a study. Did you read this one that people who have pets like dogs that really track in a lot of dirt, the children are healthier too? Have you read that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's long mystified people who study these things. And only recently did they finally have a plausible explanation. So I'll back up for a second and say that over and over, the things that they find protective against allergies are human crowding. So if there's a lot of people crammed into a small place, those kids are often protected from allergies. The great example being daycare. So if you attend daycare early in life, your risk of developing asthma later goes down, right? Mm-hmm. Daycares, of course, are sort of, they're coated in this veneer of microbes from the kids, the diapers, the saliva, just the sort of human
toxicity. But we go to commercial break and we will return to daycare with Moises Velasquez-Manoff, author of An Epidemic of Absence. Dear listeners, I'm excited to tell you about my new book, Addicted to Stress. This is a message you need to hear. Are you addicted to stress? Do you do it all while everyone depends on you? Where's all this pressure coming from? It is coming from inside you. This is why my publisher, John Wiley, asked me to write Addicted to Stress, a woman's 7-step program to reclaim joy and spontaneity in life. This fun-to-read book teaches proven strategies to reclaim your life, silence your inner critic, build a healthy body, and reframe your thoughts to change your life for the better. Dare to be happy without the guilt. Addicted to Stress is easy to get. It's available at Barnes & Noble and other fine bookstores everywhere. You can also buy it at Amazon and other online retailers. Back with Moises Velasquez-Manoff, author of An Epidemic of Absence. Okay, so we were in the toxicity of the daycare center and how that really boosts the immune system later on, correct?
Yeah, and probably it has to do with just sharing symbiotic microbes among children. But, you know, getting these microbes at an early age is turning out to be key. So you had asked about why dogs might be protective. Well, it turns out when they look at the microbiota, these are the microbes in the intestinal tract, of people who live in large families, of people who live in people who go to daycare, people who have dogs, it looks different. And one of the themes to emerge is that a diverse microbiota is better than a simple one. So the more species they can see inhabit your gut, the more protected you are against allergic diseases. What's interesting about the dogs, it was always unclear, is that do you just need to get stimulated by all the fun stuff that dogs bring in because they have their nose in the dirt and other places? Or do they actually have certain very special microbes that protect you, that actually colonize you so that you end up being part dog microbe in a sense? Well, they did this study earlier this year. They published it earlier this year where they colonized mice. They fed mice dust from a home that had dogs, and then they exposed these mice to a virus known to associate with asthma, so that kids who get this virus have a higher risk of asthma later. And what happened was that these mice were protected from the infection by the virus, so that the mode of protection was a little bit more indirect than some people had assumed, but that it seemed to be that it protected you from asthma by protecting you from a virus that might cause asthma later. And that was one way that dogs seem to help the kids they grow up with from developing asthma. Pretty interesting stuff.
It was fascinating to me, and I think really your book is such a wonderful response to a society that, as you call it, have become microphobes, and we are maybe hyper-intellectual in many arenas, but we have forgotten how to be rooted in reality, in common sense, in getting back to nature. Technologically, yes, we're so overloaded, but we all know we have to unplug and reconnect, and this is another way to do it. Now, do you think that parasites, and I know you do, could heal the gut like IBD and other things? I mean, there were some graphic descriptions in the book which are very titillating, and I leave that to our listeners to get. But, could you tell us a little bit about that?
So the parasite angle is very interesting. Basically, for one animal, these are animals. They're not single-celled organisms like microbes. For an animal to take residence inside another and not be ejected or killed or what have you, it has to have some powers over the immune system of the host, and the host is the person that's infected. So parasites have this kind of amazing ability. It's part of their bag of tricks to suppress the host immune system. And so these are all, the diseases we're talking about are all diseases that are characterized by overreaction, right? By inappropriate responses to pollen, or if it's autoimmune disease, to your own tissues, or if it's inflammatory bowel disease, to your commensal microbes. So what you want to do is get a little bit of that immune suppression into you, and then hopefully that also ends up sending the disease into remission, or better yet, preventing it from emerging completely. So there are scientists now who are looking at doing this in a very real way, because actually they've done studies with a whipworm native to pigs in humans, and it has shown phenomenal success in very small studies so far, but very phenomenal success in treating Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. Now they're trying to bring it to market. A company called Coronado Biosciences is taking it through the requisite tests to get it FDA approved. So that's in the works. I mean, we'll see what At
that point, our time together has just flown by, but this is fabulous. Such a boon to people, and they don't have to go to third world countries to get infected. Yeah, it could be controlled. Now, do you have a website where we can learn more about your book, An Epidemic of Absence? It's one of the best books I've read in a long time.
Well, thank you. Yes, the website is MoisesVM, V like Victory, M like Mary, MoisesVM.com. Or you can go to anepidemicofabsence.com, same website.
I think everyone needs to read this book to be healthier, and I think we can all get emotionally a little dirtier, too.
That's right.
Thank you for being a wonderful guest.
Thanks so much for having me.
Affirmation of the week. A good spiritual teacher is not too perfect. And now for the latest medical trends. Experts show that diets lower in fat lead to reductions in weight and BMI. Cutting down on fat without dieting will result in a slimmer figure. Levels of bad cholesterol and waist circumference also improve. This is from the British Medical Journal. According to the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission, more than 250,000 toy-related injuries are treated in ER rooms each year. And most of these injuries obviously affect children under the age of 15, and usually the head or the face, the upper part of the body. So the Academy of Ophthalmology really encourages parents to be eye smart about toys this holiday season. People acting as caregivers for family members with cardiovascular disease may inadvertently increase their own risk for heart disease by neglecting their own health. Well, that makes a lot of sense. Women looking for that elusive fountain of youth may want to consider a facial rejuvenation procedure. This is from dermatologists, obviously saying this from the Loyola University Health System, because they said that there seems to be a trend that during cold weather months, that's the most popular time for anti-aging treatments. Perhaps discounts are given, or if not, maybe the cold, you feel more contracted and withered as opposed to the tan of summer where we feel more youthful and optimistic. For people living in both rich and poor countries, the average person's happiness is based on a combination of individual wealth, possessions, and optimism. This according to a survey from the American Psychological Association. And a new study suggests that increasing the amount of sleep that teenagers get could improve their insulin resistance and prevent the future onset of diabetes. Maybe we can have our teenagers get to school a little later and stay later at the tail end of the day. Well, we come to the close of another show. I have an educational website totally free on stress management and health and wellness. TurnOnYourInnerLight.com. All the radio shows with the guest experts are archived for your listening pleasure. Click on the link and you get right into YouTube to hear that interview. Subscribe to my free newsletter from TurnOnYourInnerLight.com. You get an alert of the latest radio shows and a fresh new article on stress management and all the health tips that they're just too many. I didn't get a chance to even give you half of them. All of them available from the newsletter TurnOnYourInnerLight.com. Have a wonderful week and see you on the radio.